When you did Sacred, I know you found an agent almost right away, right? And then they were able to get you a deal for it read like almost like a fairy tale version of the author's story. Was that your experience, or not quite at all?
I mean, there's always a dark side to every fairy tale, right? My agent is
Well, yours,
fantastic.
yes.
Yeah, his name is Ruben Pfeffer, and he's been my agent um, as long as I have been publishing. I sent out to a few agents, and then I realized actually, it's kind of a funny story. My first book is about Kabbalah, mysticism. It has a sort of romantic mystical thread, and Kabbalah underpins story. And I am Jewish, but not actively religious, culturally Jewish and familially Jewish, but practically not religious. And I took a course in Kabbalah and I studied it quite a bit before I wrote the book and as I wrote the book, but I felt like, oh, maybe it would be a good thing to have a partner who knew more about Judaism on a practical level. And I did. And so after I got a couple of rejections and my book was out still with a few other agents, I Googled Jewish children's literary agent. And up came Ruben Pfeffer because he had just recently spoken at a highlights seminar for Jewish themed children's literature. That's why it came up. There's no like master list of which religions different agents identify with, which is a good thing. But he had spoken at this conference and there was a video clip of him speaking. And I thought, aha, this is a person I should send my book to. And he was sitting next to an editor, Françoise Bouy of Delacorte, which is an imprint of Random House. And she was obviously an agent and an editor who was interested in acquiring stories with Jewish themes. So I thought maybe that'll be my agent. Turned out, yes, indeed, she was the agent who acquired. So when I sent the manuscript, the first 3 chapters to Ruben that night, the next morning I woke up and we were, struggling financially at that point, quite a bit after leaving and returning and coming out of the recession and me struggling with health, just lots of things. And so when I got the email from him the next morning asking to read the whole book, that definitely was a fairy tale moment. And when he wrote to me a few days later asking for a conversation, that felt fantastic too. And then when we sold the book to Françoise Bouy on Valentine's Day of 2011, that felt pretty fantastic too. I remember telling Ruben Pfeffer, he was my Valentine that day. And now every time we sell a manuscript, we say Happy Valentine's Day to each other, which is charming and adorable. And, but I mean, publishing is a business and businesses can be really rough. And very shortly after Sacred and its sequel were acquired, and in the meanwhile, they acquired a third book from me, a standalone novel called Burning. There was the Random Penguin merger. I call it the Random Penguin Slaughter of 2012. And, bad things happened. My editor was laid off. My books at Random House lost their champion. I had 3 books. One had just been published. The other 2 hadn't even been published yet that, suddenly were orphaned. And that was really rough. Things got really, really hard. They didn't really want to acquire my 4th YA that I had written, a novel called Infandus, which I think is fantastic. And I didn't really know what to do with it. It was very different. And Ruben suggested I should write a middle grade novel just to see. And so I wrote The Question of Miracles, which is set in Corvallis, Oregon, where it rains all the time. And that book found a home with HMH. But it's a very up and down thing, publishing. There's no straight like, oh, you sold a book, now you'll sell all your books. Or, oh, you sold your book, now your advances will only get bigger. That's not been true for me. Oh, you won an award, now you clearly you're an expert and know how to revise and all your edit letters will get shorter and simpler from here. None of that has been true for me. It's all been very up and down. But what remains is the love of story and my desire to tell the truth to kids.
That has been one of the great assumptions that's been challenged by meeting so many authors through the show. In fact, I wrote about that this year author January post. So esteemed audience, if you're curious to know more, check out my January post, author year, whatever it is, author year 8, I think. But what I've learned in talking to so many writers is that I always had this assumption that eventually you would cross a finish line and you go, oh, I did it. I'm a writer now, and here's all the money and the fame, just like I knew would be waiting. And I'm good. I'll just go quietly write in a cabin, and it will be fine from here on out. And I've talked to people for whom I assumed that would have been true. And what I learned time and time again is, no, you still have to be a human, if nothing else. You've still got plenty of good days, bad days, things that can impact you. But even people, well, she said it on the show, and it's an example I used when I had Catherine Patterson on. Obviously a living legend. And that's not me talking. Congress, the Library of Congress voted her a living legend. She told me that she feels like every time she finishes a book, still, she thinks that's the end of her career. When people read this, it's over. Like, really? That's crazy to me. But I thought, well, my God, if Catherine Patterson doesn't feel that she crossed that line, I'm finished, then that there's no hope for me. That's not, that's not going to be an option. So through that up and down and craziness, how do you maintain a sense of calm, or do you?
I mean, the art and the craft of writing are different than the business of writing. And I think if I have any ability to keep my eye on what matters, is that it's dangerous for writers to put business before art and craft. And that is where you lose sight of how to make good art. I think the only way to tell good stories is to focus on the things that interest, terrify, titillate, excite, things you think are too hard for you, but you just want to try anyway, and to work on those stories. One line that you do kind of cross, I think, is that I found that I still don't know how I'm going to finish something or how I'm going to revise something, but now at least I can look at my body of work and say, well, I figured it out before, and so odds are I'll be able to figure it out again. So the first time I wrote a book, I didn't know if I could really finish a book. The second time I wrote a book, I knew I'd finished a book, so probably I could finish another book. Same goes with revision. Something like selling, that's totally different. Like, I sold another book, but that does not mean I'm going to sell this book. I think anytime we think about business before art and craft, we're giving someone else power over our work. I mean, when you get to the business side of things, someone else does have some power over your work, right? But when it comes to art and craft, I think you have to be alone in your own head first. That's some advice that I think is very good advice. I think I'm full of very good advice, and I think that's one good piece of advice: is don't put business ahead of art and craft. And you're the only person you ever know is going to read your story is you. You're the only person who's ever guaranteed to read your work. And so why not write something that satisfies and delights you?
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, if you're not at least making yourself happy, what are you doing?
Yeah, and if you're not surprising and challenging yourself too. So I write a bunch of different stuff because I'm interested in a bunch of different stuff. And I am very much wanting to always surprise and delight myself.